The shrill, desolate howl of a beast tore through the swirling snow, piercing my eardrums like a steel needle. The beast tide was here. The nest is coming. Get your lazy asses up. Grab your bows. Get to the notches. A coarse roar exploded along the frozen great wall. I shuddered, snapping awake. I scrambled up from the stone floor of the battlements, which were covered in dark red ice crusts. The north wind whipped against my face like a series of rusty, serrated knives, raw and biting. I instinctively tucked my neck into my collar and exhaled a breath of white mist onto my frostbitten, cracked palms. I reached out and grabbed the stiff, blackwood longbow leaning against the wall. The bowstring was made of low-quality animal sinew, twisted and frozen as hard as iron wire. The moment my fingers touched it, the rough friction made me gasp. The skin on my index and middle fingers had already been rubbed raw from days of practice. As the cold string brushed against the congealed scabs, a piercing pain shot through my hand. I didn't dare stop. I leaned over the notch in the wall and looked down. My pupils contracted instantly. At the edge of the grayish-white horizon, a massive, black wave was surging toward us. It wasn't a tide of water, but thousands of polar monsters. Their eyes were blood red, and foul-smelling salt water dripped from their maws. Snow wolves, armored bears, iron bristle boars. The chaotic roar of the horde was so loud the green bricks beneath my feet began to tremble. I'd been transmigrated to this hellhole for 3 days, and honestly, it felt like the world was trying to kill me. I swallowed hard, my dry throat tasting like old blood. 3 days ago, I'd woken up in this world as a low-level conscript, forced to the border to defend against the beast tide. This world was massive and cruel, infested with demons. Humanity only survived by huddling behind these sky-high walls. To stay alive, everyone practiced martial arts. But the original owner of this body was just an ordinary mortal, someone who hadn't even touched the threshold of cultivation. In this world, the levels were clear: mortal, skin refining, flesh refining, bone refining, and so on. Take Li Tai, the squad leader standing 10 paces away from me. He was a genuine skin refining warrior. His skin had been tempered by his blood essence until it was as tough as cowhide. In this bone-chilling weather, he wore only a thin layer of leather armor. He wasn't cold. In fact, he radiated heat. Ordinary beast claws couldn't even scratch him. Then there was me. Even wrapped in a thick, tattered cotton coat, my limbs were stiff with cold. That was the tragedy of being a mortal. On this battlefield, cannon fodder like me usually didn't last more than 2 weeks. What are you dazing off for? Fire! Li Tai roared. He drew the long saber at his waist and kicked a recruit who had literally wet his pants in fear. I snapped out of it. I fumbled for a white feathered arrow from the quiver at my feet and notched it. Deep breath. Horse stance. I hooked the string and pulled. I gritted my teeth, using every ounce of strength I had. This blackwood bow had a 60-pound draw weight. For a frail mortal like me, it was pure torture. The bow curved inch by inch, letting out a sickening creak. My arms shook uncontrollably. My face turned bright red, and the veins on my forehead throbbed. Release. At the commander's order, I let go. The arrow flew, but because my arms were shaking so badly, my aim was pathetic. It landed limply in the snow near a wolf's paw, not even grazing a single hair. Worse, that one shot made my arms feel like they were filled with lead. My chest heaved like a broken bellows, and my vision blurred. Damn it! With this body, I wouldn't be able to pull that bow 10 times before my muscles tore. Once that happened, I'd just be a snack for the monsters. The lead snow wolves had already reached the base of the wall. Their sharp claws dug into the ice as they began to scramble up the vertical surface. The stench of blood and beast breath wafted up. The wall descended into a brutal melee. I heard the wet thuds of blades hacking into bone and the screams of dying men. Don't stop. Keep shooting. Knock those bastards off the wall. Li Tai yelled, hacking down a wolf that had just crested the rampart. Blood sprayed across his face, making him look like a demon. My hands trembled as I reached for another arrow. I was exhausted. My muscles were cramping, and my frozen fingers could barely grip the fletching. A red-eyed snow wolf was now less than 3 meters from my notch. I could see its yellowing fangs. Suddenly, a clear hum echoed in my mind. A cold, mechanical voice rang out. and for the first time in 3 days, I felt like crying with joy. Ding! Life-threatening crisis detected. Sharpshooter panel activated. Binding successful. A semi-transparent blue screen floated in my vision. It showed my stats: Strength 5, Constitution 4, Vision 6, Agility 5. The average for an adult male was 10. I was half a man. But then I saw the talents. First, archery affinity. Pulling a bow no longer consumed stamina or caused muscle strain. Second, arrow speed boost. My shots would travel 30% faster. Third, ballistic correction. My arrows would have a slight auto-aiming capability. There were even passive effects. Every shot I fired would temper my body, and every hit would steal energy from the world to restore my health. My heart hammered against my ribs. A system. The stories were true. The transmigrator's gift might be late, but it never missed. I looked at the wolf leaping through the air toward me. The fear was gone, replaced by a surge of pure aggression. Die, you beast! I snatched a white feathered arrow and notched it. The 60-pound bow, which had felt like a mountain earlier, now felt like nothing. My arms were steady as stone. I drew the bow into a perfect full moon. The string snapped. The arrow turned into a blur, moving too fast for the eye to follow. My aim was actually off by half an inch, but as the arrow flew, I saw it shift slightly in midair. Poochie! The arrow drove straight through the wolf's open mouth and out the back of its skull. The force pinned the creature to the frozen ground outside the wall. A one-shot kill. Before I could even catch my breath, 3 strange, powerful sensations washed over my body. My core passives triggered the moment that arrow left the string. Archery equals body tempering. A faint but incredibly pure current of warmth emerged from thin air inside me, flowing through my limbs and bones. My muscles, which had been stiff from the biting cold and exhaustion, felt like parched earth receiving a sudden rain. They relaxed and strengthened instantly. Then, the second passive kicked in. Hit equals vitality. Another surge of heat poured into my dantian. I felt a fire ignite in my shriveled stomach. The dizziness caused by hunger and weakness vanished, replaced by a wave of raw strength. I froze for a second, feeling the heat coursing through me. I looked down at my hands, covered in frostbite, then looked up at the horizon. Below the city wall, a dense, black wave of beasts stretched out like an endless ocean. The wind remained freezing, but my heart was burning. Before, these monsters were nothing but a death sentence. Now, these weren't monsters. They were walking experience points. Again, I muttered. I grinned, showing gums that were slightly purple from the cold. I reached back and snatched 3 arrows from my quiver at once. Draw. No fatigue. Fire. Get stronger. The arrows whistled through the air. Asterisk swoosh. 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 Asterisk. Eventually, the wind and snow began to die down. That small, probing pack of beasts retreated back into the depths of the gray-white wasteland, leaving behind dozens of mangled corpses. Don't just stand there, you idiots, a coarse voice boomed across the wall. It was the squad leader, Li Tai. He was swearing as he wiped frozen blood off his long blade with a rag. The ice made a grating, screeching sound against the steel. Move your asses. Get down there and clean the battlefield. Pull every arrow that isn't broken out of those carcasses. If you're missing even one, I'm cutting your rations. I exhaled a long cloud of white mist and slung my blackwood bow over my shoulder. I followed the other numb-faced recruits down the frost-covered steps. My heart was still racing from the fight, but I realized something strange. I wasn't like the others. The recruits around me had trembling legs and were vomiting from the gore. I felt steady. That vitality boost from the kill had acted like a healing tonic. Although my status still labeled me as a mortal, I felt a lingering warmth in my veins. I could actually feel my fingers again. Outside the wall, it was a slaughterhouse. Mangled wolves, armored bears bristling with arrows, and severed limbs littered the snow. The stench was thick, and the beast blood had frozen into a jarring dark red. I walked over to the wolf I had killed. The thing was the size of a small calf, with fur as stiff as steel needles. I stepped on its head, gripped the white feathered arrow buried in its eye socket, and pulled. Poochie. Semi-solidified blood sprayed out, splattering my ragged cotton shoes. I didn't blink. I wiped the arrowhead on the wolf's fur and tucked it back into my quiver. In this border camp, resources were everything. One iron-tipped arrow was worth 2 days of food for a peasant. If you lost your arrows and couldn't recover them, the quartermaster would starve you without a second thought. By the time we finished clearing the field, the sky was pitch black. The northern wind began to howl again, sounding like ghosts crying in the dark. Food's ready. Get in line. Anyone who cuts will lose a hand. The kitchen was tucked away in a corner of the camp, protected from the wind. A few burly cooks were stirring massive iron pots with wooden ladles the size of shovels. I held my chipped ceramic bowl and shuffled forward in line. The cold wind whipped down my collar, but the gnawing hunger in my gut was worse. The energy from the system was great, but this body still needed real calories. When it was finally my turn, a cook slopped a ladle of gray-brown soup into my bowl with a dull thud. A few suspicious vegetable leaves and drops of grease floated on top. It smelled strongly of wild musk and gaminess. Along with the soup, I got 2 black flour buns that were as hard as rocks. This was the dinner for the border guards: mixed blood soup and stone bread. The soup was made from the beasts killed that day, mixed with old rice that had probably been sitting in a cellar for years. 4 high-level martial artists. This stuff was too unclean to eat, but for us, cannon fodder. It was the only thing keeping us alive. I found a spot by a wall to crouch down. I tried to take a bite of the bun. Crack. My jaw ached, and the bread only had a tiny white tooth mark on it. This thing wasn't food, it was a weapon. If you hit someone in the head with it, you'd leave a lump. I sighed and broke the bun into small pieces, soaking them in the hot soup. Once they softened, I shoveled them into my mouth. There was no salt, and the soup tasted foul and bloody, and I could even chew bits of fur and sand that hadn't been cleaned out. I didn't care, and I bolted it down. As the hot liquid hit my stomach, the cramping pain finally eased. All around me, the only sounds were the desperate slurping of men trying to survive. In a place where life is as cheap as grass, a hot meal is the ultimate luxury. After eating, I followed the group back to the barracks. As I pushed aside the heavy, tattered cotton curtain, a wave of foul air hit me: sweat, stinky feet, blood, and cheap tobacco. It was enough to make my eyes water. There were no individual beds, just one long raised platform, a kong, that stretched across the entire room. It was covered in blackened hay and rotting furs. 30 grown men were crammed onto this single platform, snoring like thunder. I found my narrow sliver of space and lay down. The bedding was ice cold, and the hay poked through my clothes, making me itch. SSS, damn it, it hurts. A pained whimper came from the man next to me. It was a new recruit named Ergo. He was clutching his right arm, tears streaming down his face. Today on the wall, he had forced himself to draw that 60-pound bout twice. Now, his arms were swollen like steamed buns. His muscles were severely torn. He couldn't even lift his hand to touch his forehead. "Stop your whining," an old soldier growled, rolling over. "It's only the first day. If you're broken after 2 shots, you'll be nothing but a snack for the demons tomorrow. You won't even be able to hold a knife." Ergo shut up instantly, his body shaking as he sobbed silently. At the border, recruits didn't just die from beast fangs. They died because their bodies gave out. Muscle tears and depleted vitality meant you couldn't even run when the real slaughter started. Listening to his muffled cries, I silently lifted my hands in the dark. I clenched my fists. My fingers were nimble. My arms felt a little heavy, sure, but there was no pain, no tears, no strain. With a thought, the translucent blue screen flickered back to life in my vision. Host, Lin Yuan. Level, mortal. Stats, Strength 5, Constitution 4, Vision 6, Agility 5. Archery Mastery, Beginner. I stared at that simple display and felt a glimmer of hope. In this hellhole, I finally had a chance. My eyes glowed in the dark as the realization hit me. Drawing a bow without getting tired? This talent was nothing short of a miracle. In this world, a normal person would snap their muscles after firing 10 arrows in a day. But with this gift, I could ignore physical fatigue entirely. If I wanted to, I could fire 100 arrows a day, maybe even 1,000. Then there was the core passive. Archery was body refining. Others had to spend a fortune on rare herbs and endure agonizing training to temper their skin and bone. All I had to do was repeat the mechanical motion of drawing and releasing. I could grow stronger without limit. Stay low, I told myself. I made a silent vow right then and there. I could never let anyone know I didn't have a stamina limit. Until I was strong enough to protect myself, I had to be a ghost. A tall tree catches the wind, and in a border camp like this, the wind was a hurricane. During the day, I'd just blend in with the crowd. I'd miss my shots on purpose. I wouldn't stand out. Only when I was off duty would I secretly grind my archery proficiency like a madman. Outside, the wind and snow continued to howl, slamming against the rotten wooden walls with a dull thud. Surrounded by the stench of foot rot and the sound of thunderous snoring, I finally closed my eyes. Clang, clang, clang. The harsh sound of a cracked brass gong shattered the dawn. It was so loud it shook the frost off the walls. I snapped my eyes open. I didn't feel the usual morning soreness. Not only had my stamina fully recovered, but because I'd absorbed the vitality of that snow wolf yesterday, my lower abdomen felt warm, like I had a heater tucked under my skin. Ack, help me. A distorted groan came from the hay next to me. It was Ergo. His face was flushed red with fever, and his lips were cracked and white. His arms were swollen so badly they looked shiny. He couldn't even prop himself up. He just writhed on the bunk like a fish out of water. If you aren't out here in 3 breaths, I'll whip you to death, an old soldier roared from outside. I didn't look back at Ergo. In a hellhole like this, sympathy was the most expensive thing you could own. I grabbed my worn cotton shoes, frozen solid like blocks of iron, and banged them against the edge of the bed to knock out the ice. I shoved my feet in, enduring the bone-chilling cold, and pushed through the heavy door curtain. The wind sliced at my neck like a blade. On the training grounds at the foot of the Great Wall, the snow had been trampled into a filthy, dark gray slush. Our captain, Li Tai, stood there with a grim face, counting heads. In a squad of 30, 5 had died in the small beast raid last night. 3 more couldn't get out of bed this morning, including Ergo. In a border camp, failing to show up for morning roll call was a death sentence. No army doctor was going to waste precious herbs on mortal cannon fodder. Check your gear. Li Tai barked. If anyone lost their arrows yesterday, your breakfast is halved. The sound of rustling quivers filled the air as everyone scrambled to check. I stood in the back row, hands tucked into my sleeves, looking down at my toes. My quiver was perfect. 10 white feathered arrows sat neatly inside. Even though I'd killed a wolf, I had made sure to retrieve my arrow from its carcass before the cleanup crew arrived. Suddenly, a skinny figure drifted toward me. It was an old soldier with half an ear missing and a mouth full of yellow, rotting teeth. He wore the same tattered leather armor as the rest of us, but he had a bulging tobacco pouch hanging from his waist. Everyone called him Wang Lizi. His shifty eyes scanned my full quiver. He grinned, releasing a wave of foul breath. Hey, new kid, you're pretty good at hiding, aren't you? Didn't fire a single shot yesterday? Just here to eat the army's food for free. I frowned slightly. I knew how this worked. Old soldiers bullying recruits was a daily ritual. I just wanted to grow in silence. I didn't want trouble. What, you mute? Wang Lizi got bolder. He reached out to grab my quiver. I shot every arrow I had yesterday covering you brats. Even broke 2. Come on, lend me 3 good ones for the inspection. Before I could answer, he pulled 3 warped, half-balled arrows from his own back and tried to shove them into my arms while reaching for my straight, blood-stained white feathers. What are you doing? I instinctively clamped my hand over my quiver. My gaze turned cold. Trading trash for good arrows? On a border where a beast tide could break out at any second, a good arrow was a life. Those 3 scraps he was offering were rusted and bent. They wouldn't fly straight, and they wouldn't even scratch a demon's hide. He was trying to take my life. What? No respect. Wang Lizi's face darkened. His bony hand clamped onto my wrist like a steel vise. I felt a surge of pain. This old soldier was immortal, like me, but years of fighting on the edge of death had pushed his physique to the absolute limit. I wasn't strong enough to fight him yet. What's the shouting about? Li Tai, our captain, heard the commotion and marched over. He kicked a bystander out of the way and glared at us. Wang Lizi immediately swapped his scowl for a flattering smile. He pointed at me. Captain, this recruit turned tail yesterday. Didn't fire a single arrow. His quiver is still full. According to military law, A coward wasting equipment should get 10 lashes. I was just teaching him to hand over his extra arrows to the heroes who actually killed something yesterday. When he said, "Heroes," Wang Lizi raised his voice and glanced toward the front of the line. Standing there was a young soldier who looked nothing like the rest of us cannon fodder. He wore brand new iron scale armor and a pure white snow fox fur collar. Even in this freezing weather, he was casually playing with a beautiful, gem-encrusted dagger. A young master soldier. The realization clicked in my head instantly. Li Tai followed Wang Lizi's gaze to the young master, and his harsh eyes softened. He even showed a hint of hidden fear. When he turned back to me, his eyes were cold as ice. Is what he said true? I started to explain that I had killed the wolf myself, but Wang Lizi was faster. He snatched the blood-stained arrow from my quiver and held it up high for everyone to see. "Look, there's wolf blood on this arrowhead," Wang Lizi shouted. "This is the proof of young Master Qian's greatness from yesterday. He pierced that iron-bone wolf with a single shot. I saw it with my own eyes. Young Master Qian's archery is divine. This brat stole the trophy arrow while no one was looking, and now he's trying to lie about it." The other old soldiers caught on instantly. They chimed in like a pack of vultures. "Yeah, I saw it too. Young Master Qian was incredible. This new kid has sticky fingers, stealing the young master's kill." At the front of the line, the young master, Qian Feng, finally stopped playing with his dagger. He lazily raised his eyelids and looked back at me. Qian Feng didn't even look at me. He just let out a soft, mocking laugh and glanced at Wang Lizi. "You've got sharp eyes for an old dog," he said. "My arrows are dirty now. I don't want them back. But that wolf's kill credit. Go to the quartermaster and register it under my name." "Understood. Leave it to me, young Master Qian." Wang Lizi grinned, his face wrinkling up like a pug begging for a bone. He looked pathetic. Then, he turned to me, his smile vanishing instantly. He leaned in close, his voice a low, venomous hiss. "You hear that? Young Master Qian is feeling generous. He's not going to execute you for stealing military merit. Now, take these 3 broken arrows and hand over your good ones. We'll call it even. If you don't, well, the beast tide is coming tomorrow. I'll make sure you die a very messy death." My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't fear. It was a white-hot rage burning in my chest, a fire I had to force myself to suppress. I saw the whole game now. Qian Feng was a rich kid from a powerful family, sent to the border to pad his resume with fake achievements. Scum like Wang Lizi were his hunting dogs, stealing spoils from the cannon fodder to feed their master. I looked at Captain Li Tai. He stood there, eyes fixed on the ground, pretending he didn't see a thing. In this frozen hell, rules were for the dead. Power and background were the only laws for the living. "Fine," I said. I took a deep breath of the freezing air, forcing the coldness out of my eyes. I let my hand drop from my quiver and put on a mask of trembling cowardice. Brother Wang is right. I was terrified yesterday. Giving me good arrows is a waste. Here, take them, please. I pulled out my last 2 high-quality arrows and handed them over. Then, I reached down and picked up the 3 pieces of junk Wang Lizi had thrown in the dirt. They were pathetic, crooked shafts and missing feathers. I tucked them carefully into my quiver like they were treasure. "Smart kid," Wang Lizi said, patting my cheek with a sneer. "Keep your head down. Maybe you'll last 2 weeks." The confrontation ended. Li Tai barked in order to disperse, and we lined up for breakfast. It was a bowl of watery porridge so thin I could see my own reflection in it. I took my bowl and sat alone in the shadow of a wall, letting the warmth of the grain trickle down my throat. I pulled out one of the waste arrows Wang Lizi gave me. The shaft was cheap pine, warped from the damp cold. Most of the fletching had fallen off, leaving only a few mangled feathers. The iron tip was rusted and blunt. Common sense told me this thing would fly sideways the moment it left the bow. It couldn't hit a pig at 10 paces, let alone pierce a demon's hide. For a normal soldier, carrying these was a death sentence. But as I touched the rim of my bowl, a dark, chilling smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. System, I thought. The pale blue screen shimmered into view. Core passive. Archery equals body refinement. Exclusive talent. Infinite draw, no fatigue. Exclusive talent. Absolute hit, weight/force scaling. To a normal archer, a warped shaft meant a missed shot. To me, it didn't matter. As long as I pulled the string, my body grew stronger. As long as the arrow left the bow, my talent would forcibly correct its path. I could shoot a twig and make it find a heart. Asterisk, steal my arrows. Take my credit. Asterisk. I slid the broken arrow back into its quiver and rubbed the rough wood of my black bow. I felt like a lone wolf on the tundra, waiting for the right moment to strike. Chin Feng, Wang Lizi. In a place where death happens every second, accidents are very common. I hope your lives are tougher than these broken arrows. After breakfast, it was time for drills. The veterans mostly huddled in the corners, smoking cheap tobacco to save their energy. To them, every bow pull was a waste of precious muscle. I walked alone to the furthest corner of the training grounds. 100 paces away stood a tattered straw target, scarred by blade marks. I slowly raised my bow. The wind bit at my face like a dull knife. I planted my feet firmly into the frozen earth. This body belonged to a fisherman's son from the eastern sea. He had spent his life pulling heavy nets through crashing waves. His hands were calloused and his grip was firm, but he never could have pulled a 60-pound military bow repeatedly. But I wasn't him anymore. Twang! The bowstring vibrated. A crooked, featherless arrow hissed through the air. It started to spin wildly after only 2 meters, looking like it would nosedive into the snow. But a split second later, an invisible force seized it. Exclusive talent. Absolute hit. Triggered. Thwack. The arrow curved in midair, a defiant, impossible trajectory that ended right in the throat of the straw target. I walked over, pulled it out, and went back to my spot. Inside my body, a current of heat was racing through my veins. Core passive triggered. Archery equals body refinement. Blood and chi slightly increased. Muscle fibers restructuring. I had fired over 100 arrows in this corner. Anyone else, even Captain Li Tai, would have had arms like jelly by now. But with my infinite draw talent, my hands didn't even shake. My thin, malnourished muscles were becoming dense and tight. My ragged cotton coat, once loose and baggy, was starting to show the outline of a solid frame. I exhaled a cloud of white mist and checked my stats. Strength, 5.2. Constitution, 4.5. The numbers climbed slowly, but they climbed steady. If the base was high enough, I could eventually crush those high and mighty martial artists. I was about to fire my 103rd arrow when a piercing scream erupted from the barracks. Crash! A wooden door was kicked off its hinges, flying into the snow. 2 blood-covered figures rolled out, locked in a desperate struggle. You son of a bitch! You dare steal my winter meat? I'll kill you. It was Blind Lu, a one-eyed veteran who had survived more battles than I could count. He was vicious. He was currently pinned on top of a scrawny new recruit, stabbing a rusted butcher knife repeatedly into the kid's shoulder. Squelch! Squelch! Blood sprayed, staining the white snow a gruesome crimson. The kid underneath him was Shou Ho, a boy who had been conscripted in the same batch as me. He was usually too terrified to even speak above a whisper. But right now, he was fighting for his life. Shou Ho's eyes exploded with a feral light. His eyeballs bulged from their sockets, bloodshot and frantic. He didn't seem to feel the butcher knife carving holes into his shoulder. Instead, his hands locked onto Blind Lu's throat like iron clamps. He let out a guttural, wordless roar. I frowned, watching from a distance. I knew what started this. Wang Lizi had framed him. He'd tucked a piece of wolf meat, hard as a rock and the size of a fist, under Shou Ho's straw mat. In this starving border camp, that meat was a life-saving medicine. Blind Lu valued it more than his own soul. When he found it missing after drills, he didn't ask questions. He just looked for someone to bleed. The veteran soldiers didn't move. They stood in a circle, holding their cracked wooden bowls, watching the show with cold, indifferent eyes. No one stepped in to break it up. Even Captain Li Tai just stood under the eaves, picking his teeth and scowling. To the veterans, bullying a recruit was the natural order of things. Blind Lu just needed a scapegoat to assert his dominance. You dare fight back? You lowly rat! Blind Lu screamed. He was enraged that a weakling like Shou Ho hadn't begged for mercy. He ripped the knife out of the boy's shoulder and flipped the blade. He aimed straight for Shou Ho's throat. If I die, you're coming with me. Shou Ho let out a high-pitched, desperate shriek. Hunger and terror had finally turned this sheep into a mad dog. He didn't dodge. He arched his back and lunged forward, sinking his teeth into Blind Lu's wrist. Crack. The sound of bone snapping made my skin crawl. Shoho bit down with everything he had, tearing through the artery and ripping away a massive chunk of flesh. Blind Lu let out a squeal like a slaughtered pig. The knife clattered to the snow. Blood sprayed from his wrist like a fountain, coating Shoho's face in a hot, crimson mask. But the kid didn't let go. He was like a wild dog locked onto a kill. He started making a sickening swallowing sound. He was actually drinking Blind Lu's blood. Get off me. Get off. Blind Lu panicked. He hammered his fist into Shoho's head. Asterisk thud. Thud. Asterisk. Shoho's nose shattered. His forehead split open. But he wouldn't back down. His left hand scrambled through the snow until he found the fallen butcher knife. Without a second of hesitation, he drove the blade deep into Blind Lu's lower back. Blind Lu's screams stopped instantly. His body gave two violent jerks, the light in his eyes fading into a dull gray. His heavy corpse collapsed onto Shoho. The boy took a few more heavy punches to the chest, his eyes rolled back, and he began vomiting blood mixed with bits of internal organs. It was over. They were both dead. The training ground fell into a deathly silence, save for the whistling wind. For a piece of rotten meat, a veteran and a recruit had torn each other apart like rabid animals. I saw Wang Lizi standing in the back. His face paled, and he quietly slipped away into the crowd. It was obvious he was the one who planted the meat. Captain Li Tai spat out his toothpick and walked over to the bodies. He kicked Blind Lu's head. Damn it. What a waste, Li Tai cursed. The beast tide is coming, and I'm already losing men. You too. Drag these failures out. Throw them in the blood trench to feed the wolves. There was no trial. No mercy. Not even a sigh of regret. 2 lives were gone, crushed like ants under a boot. The crowd dispersed, and a few veterans casually dragged the bodies away, leaving 2 long, gruesome red streaks in the white snow. I stood 100 paces away, watching it all. I didn't join the crowd. I didn't show any emotion. But the clarity in my eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, deep resolve. This was the border. Weakness was the ultimate sin. Survival meant being more ruthless than the man next to me. If Shoho had even a shred of real strength, Blind Lu wouldn't have dared to pull a knife without asking questions. Today it was Shoho. Tomorrow, it could be Wang Lizi or some highborn officer sticking a knife in my chest for any reason they liked. It wasn't enough. My strength was still nowhere near enough. I looked down at my wooden arrow. The tip was starting to crack from the constant impact. I took a deep breath of the metallic, bloody air and cleared my mind. I turned back to the target. I gripped the bow. I pulled. Twang. Arrow 104. The archery equals body refinement notification flashed again. My blood and chi surged. While others plotted or died over scraps of meat, I did the only thing that mattered. I pulled the string to full draw. Night fell again. The barracks felt a little roomier with 2 empty spots on the long wooden bed, but the smell of blood and oppression was thicker than before. Everyone went to sleep early, dreading the coming beast tide. In the middle of the night, my eyes snapped open. I wasn't sleeping. I sat cross-legged on the frozen straw mat, feeling the heat in my veins. After 1,500 draws today, that inner warmth had reached a breaking point. A foul-smelling, grayish sludge began to seep out of my pores. It was the toxins and impurities accumulated in this body over years of malnutrition. My internal interface flashed wildly. Detected, blood and chi at capacity. Muscle tempering reached maximum. Breaking through. Asterisk asterisk. Asterisk crack. Crack. Asterisk. Crack. Small, rapid pops echoed from my bones. My skin began to take on a faint, bronze luster. The frostbite and dead skin from the mountain cold began to peel away at an incredible rate, revealing fresh, healed tissue underneath. A surge of power shot up my spine and hit my brain like a lightning bolt. Status updated. Mortal Realm Skin Tempering Stage. Initial. I clenched my fist. The explosive power in my fingertips made me grin, a cold, hard smile. Skin Tempering Stage. From this moment on, I was no longer just a piece of cannon fodder waiting to be slaughtered. The sun hadn't risen yet, and the wind was still howling like a wounded beast outside the barracks. I sat up amidst the snoring and the stench of unwashed feet. But everything felt different. The cold didn't bite anymore. The freezing air that used to chill my bones now felt like a mild autumn breeze. I looked at my hands in the dim light filtering through the door. The cracks and sores were gone. In their place was a layer of dark red scabs. I rubbed my hands together, and the scabs fell away like dust. Beneath them, my new skin shimmered with a dull, bronze glow. I squeezed my fist. Hard. Crack. My knuckles let out a sharp, crisp pop. My skin felt tight and incredibly resilient, like it had been wrapped in a layer of high-quality, treated oxhide. This was the skin tempering stage. In this hellhole of a camp where human life was cheaper than grass, Captain Li Tai ruled like a god because of this strength. He decided who lived and who died among the fodder. Now, only 4 days after crossing into this world, I had crossed that same threshold. By obsessively drawing my bow, I had forced my way past a barrier most people never touch in a lifetime. My strength had at least doubled since yesterday. Even without my special talent for effortless drawing, I could now pull that 60-pound blackwood bow with ease. Asterisk clang. 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 Asterisk. The sound of a cracked gong shattered the morning air. "Get up, you lazy bastards," a veteran screamed from outside. "Today we're hauling those 2 pieces of trash from yesterday to the blood trench. Anyone who's slow loses their breakfast." I jumped off the heated brick bed, pulled on my tattered cotton shoes, and slung my blackwood bow and quiver over my shoulder. I walked out of the barracks without a word. In the middle of the clearing, the 2 frozen corpses were still there. Blind Lu and Shou Ho. They had killed each other yesterday, and the blood beneath them had frozen into a massive, jagged red slab. Captain Li Tai, wrapped in a thick sheepskin coat, let out a long yawn. He pointed lazily at a few men. You, and Wang Lizi. Plus that recruit. Yeah, you. Zhang Wei, right? He squinted at me. The 4 of you dragged these dead ghosts 2 miles out to the body trench. Don't come back for porridge until it's done. The veterans cursed under their breath at the rotten luck. Wang Lizi spat, tucked his tobacco pipe into his belt, and turned around. His beady eyes landed on me, flashing with a sudden, venomous streak. Yesterday, he had forced me to trade my good arrows for his broken ones. He probably expected me to be trembling in fear, but instead, I had spent the whole day practicing. It clearly bothered him. He saw my silence not as submission, but as a hidden threat. "Pa, bad luck following me around," Wang Lizi muttered. He walked over and kicked me hard in the back of the leg. "What are you staring at? Grab the rope. You expect me to haul dead meat." He used half his strength on that kick. He wanted me to collapse into the snow and look like a fool. Thud. It was a dull, heavy sound. Wang Lizi froze. It didn't feel like he had kicked a human calf. It felt like he'd slammed his foot into a solid wooden post wrapped in thick leather. His toes went numb from the impact. I didn't move. I didn't even wobble. I turned my head and looked at him. My eyes were as calm and deep as a stagnant well. "What are you looking at?" "Pull," Wang Lizi barked. My gaze made his heart skip a beat, but he covered it with rage. He figured I was just frozen stiff and hadn't felt the pain yet. I didn't say a word. I walked forward, grabbed the thick hemp rope tied to the corpse's ankles, and threw it over my shoulder. I began dragging the heavy bodies toward the camp gates. The other 2 veterans were happy to slack off, following far behind and chatting. Wang Lizi puffed on his pipe, trailing me closely, his eyes darting around like a cornered rat. Outside the gates, the wind howled louder. Visibility was less than 10 meters. The world was a blinding white void. 2 miles out, a bottomless natural ice chasm appeared. This was the infamous body trench. It wasn't just for dead soldiers. It was filled with the remains of demonic beasts. The stench of rot and blood rose from the depths even in this cold, making it a favorite spot for Arctic predators. "All right, drop him here," one of the veterans shouted. They couldn't stand the biting wind anymore. "Lizi, we're heading back to grab a spot for the hot porridge. You keep an eye on the kid." They didn't wait for an answer before running back toward the camp. This was the perfect place for a murder. Wang Lizi tapped the ash out of his pipe and walked slowly up behind me. "You've got some stamina, kid. Dragging 2 bodies 2 miles, and you aren't even winded," he said, his voice dripping with fake friendliness. His hand was already creeping toward the butcher's knife at his waist. I unslung the rope and turned to face him. "Do you need something, Brother Lizi?" "Do I need something?" Oh, I definitely do. He spat a glob of yellow phlegm and stared hungrily at my quiver. I didn't look close enough yesterday. Your quiver looks a bit bulged at the bottom. Hiding some silver, are we? A man needs to look after the supply officers if he wants to survive. Since you're new, you need to learn the rules. Hand over the quiver. I'll keep it safe for you. He wasn't just after the arrows anymore. He wanted to squeeze every last drop of value out of me. If I resisted, he'd stab me and kick me into the trench. Nobody would care about one more dead recruit in a blizzard. There's no money, Brother Lizy, I said calmly. Just those 3 wooden arrows you gave me yesterday. Stop your damn lying. I'll check for myself. His face twisted. He whipped the rusty knife from his belt and lunged at me like a starved wolf. His left hand reached for my collar. It was a vicious move. If I tried to dodge, his right hand would drive that knife straight into my gut. But I didn't dodge. I didn't even blink. There was no fear in my eyes, only a bone-chilling cold. Snap. The sound of the impact was sharp and sudden. Wang Lizy's left hand stopped dead in midair. His eyes widened, filling with a sudden, frantic terror. His surefire grab had been intercepted. My hand, which had been covered in frostbite and sores only hours ago, was now like a steel vise. I clamped down on his wrist, my fingers digging deep into his flesh. A wave of overwhelming power surged through my arm. I heard his bones groan under the pressure. You? Wang Lizy gasped, struggling to pull away. He felt like he was trying to move a mountain. Skin tempering? Impossible. You were shaking just pulling a bow. His voice cracked into a high-pitched scream. In desperation, he swung the knife at my chest. My eyes flashed. I didn't back up. I stepped into his space, my left hand still pinning his wrist. I planted my right foot in the snow, twisted my hips, and delivered a brutal headbutt right into the bridge of his nose. Crack. It sounded like a hammer hitting a watermelon. Wang Lizy let out a blood-curdling shriek. His nose shattered instantly. Blood and tears sprayed into the freezing air. The knife lost its aim, scraping across my tattered coat. It hit my skin, but it only left a faint white mark. It didn't even break the surface. That was the power of the skin tempering stage. Unless it's a heavy weapon or a direct thrust to a vital spot, ordinary blades can't get through. I didn't stop. In this world of monsters and men, mercy was a death sentence. Mercy to an enemy is cruelty to yourself. I let go of Wang Lizy's hand. My right hand moved like a flash of lightning, reaching for the quiver at my lower back. With a sharp shink, I pulled out a piece of junk, a low-quality wooden arrow with a rusted tip and half the fletching rotted away. It was the exact same useless arrow Wang Lizy had forced on me yesterday. You said yesterday that this broken thing was perfect for me, I said. My voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. In the freezing wind, it sounded like a whisper from the god of death. Wang Lizy was blind with pain, clutching his blood-sprayed nose. He tried to beg. Wait, brother, let's talk. Putch. I didn't use my bow. I gripped the shaft of that junk arrow like a short spear and slammed it into Wang Lizy's throat with raw, violent force. Because the tip was blunt, it didn't slide and smooth like a sharp blade. Instead, there was a sickening sound of tearing flesh and grinding gristle. The rusted tip forced its way through his windpipe and veins, bursting out the back of his neck with a half-inch of bloody wood. Gurgle. His plea for mercy instantly turned into the sound of a leaking bellows. His eyes bulged out of their sockets, and his hands clawed desperately at my arms. Thick, bubbling blood foam poured from his mouth. I watched him with an expressionless face, my right hand still white-knuckled on the arrow shaft. I even gave it a slow, brutal twist. 10 seconds later, Wang Lizy's body went limp. He collapsed into the snow like a pile of wet mud, the life completely drained from his eyes. I let go, allowing the corpse to fall. I stood there and took a deep breath. The heavy scent of blood filled my lungs, but instead of making me sick, it felt incredibly clearing. Yesterday, I had to pretend to be submissive while this old dog treated me like dirt. Today, I sent him to hell with my own hands. In this world where power is everything, strength is the only passport that matters. I knelt down and began to strip the body with practiced efficiency. I searched his coat and found 2 things: a small, foul-smelling cloth pouch containing a handful of coarse salt, and the 2 perfect, white feathered arrows he had stolen from me yesterday. Salt was a treasure here. It was the only way to keep your strength up. I tucked the salt into my shirt and slid the good arrows back into my quiver. Then, with a heavy kick, I sent Wang Lizi's body tumbling into the deep corpse trench alongside Blind Lu and Shou Ho. Thump, thump, thump. After a few dull impacts, the excited howls of Arctic stone-axe wolves echoed from below. The heavy snow would soon cover the bloodstains as if nothing had ever happened. On the border, one missing person didn't even cause a ripple. Everyone knew Wang Lizi was a thief. The quartermaster would just assume he deserted or got eaten by a stray beast. As for that high and mighty young Master Qian, I looked toward the main camp. Wang Lizi was just his errand dog. The noble soldier who used me as a stepping stone would have to pay his debt eventually, with interest. I wiped the blood off my hands with a clump of snow and turned back toward the camp. My steps were steady, like a wasteland wolf that had just grown its first set of fangs. Suddenly, a notification flashed in my mind. Host's mental state has evolved. Killing intent detected. Hidden panel unlocked. Beast bestiary. Kill beasts to unlock weaknesses and extra attribute bonuses. A cold, sharp smile touched my lips. I was actually starting to look forward to the beast tide. The wind and snow grew heavier, swallowing my footprints as I walked back. By the time I reached the barracks, the sky was just beginning to turn gray. No one noticed how long I'd been gone, and no one cared that Wang Lizi hadn't returned. In this border camp, people deserted or died in frozen corners every single day. I walked to the kitchen and grabbed my ration, a bowl of watery, coarse rice porridge. I found a spot by a wall out of the wind and crouched down. Reaching into my shirt, I pulled out the salt pouch and used my fingernail to pick out a few grains of coarse blue salt, carefully sprinkling them into the bowl. As the hot porridge dissolved the salt, I took a large gulp. The salty tang exploded on my tongue, sending a wave of warmth straight to my stomach. To the boy I used to be, a fisherman from the Eastern Sea, sea salt was common. But to a piece of cannon fodder in this frozen hell, this was a divine medicine that could make muscles come alive again. Rumble. Just as I swallowed the last bite, the stone floor beneath me began to vibrate. Then, 3 long, piercing horn blasts tore through the morning silence. Woo woo woo. The sound was several times louder than the day I first arrived. It felt like the entire ice-snow Great Wall was trembling. Enemy attack. It's a medium-sized beast nest. Everyone on the wall. Move. The messenger's frantic screams pierced the wind. The camp exploded into chaos. Veterans who had been lounging in bed scrambled out like cats with their tails stepped on, fumbling with cold leather armor as they sprinted for the ramparts. Hurry up. If you don't want to die, move. Anyone late gets executed. Captain Li Tai stood on the stone steps, his eyes bloodshot, roaring with his sword drawn. I blended into the crowd, running at a steady, unremarkable pace. I didn't show off any of my new physical power. I even hunched my back slightly, mimicking the other recruits, pretending to shiver from the cold. A tall tree catches the wind first. Even though I had broken through to the skin-tempering stage, in a meat grinder battle like this, I was still just a slightly stronger ant. If I stood out too much, the officers would throw me into the most dangerous breach as a suicide squad. The only way to survive was to stay low and harvest experience quietly. As soon as I hit the battlements, a nauseating, thick stench hit me like a physical wall. I narrowed my eyes, my pupils shrinking. The grayish-white wasteland outside the wall had vanished. In its place was a literal ocean of black, a surging, endless tide. Tens of thousands of Arctic beasts were packed together, a black tsunami crashing toward the wall. Leading the charge weren't just the usual snow wolves or boars. There were armored rhinos the size of small hills and spined forest leopards covered in jagged needles. The earth shook, and ice shards sprayed everywhere. The sheer pressure of it was enough to make any normal recruit collapse in terror. Mother of God, we're in for it this time. A veteran beside me stammered, his knuckles white as he gripped his blade. Archers ready. Load armor-piercing arrows, the commander yelled. Thousands of archers drew their bows in unison. Being in the back row of the cannon fodder camp, I didn't get any of the precious armor-piercing arrows. I held my 60-pound blackwood bow and a standard white feathered arrow. I took a deep breath. My years of surviving on the ocean gave me a level of focus most of these men lacked. I drew my string back just enough to look normal, my eyes piercing through the snow, locking onto the swarm below. Host has entered a large-scale battlefield. A hidden panel flickered to life in my vision. It was a bestiary. A pale blue screen expanded across my retina, and suddenly, the world changed. Over the heads of the roaring monsters below, tiny, glowing red dots appeared. Those were their fatal weaknesses. Fire, the commander screamed. The release of thousands of bowstrings sounded like a swarm of locusts taking flight. A black rain of arrows blotted out the gray sky and poured down. The heavy thuds of wood and iron hitting flesh became a continuous, sickening rhythm. The first wave of hundreds of beasts was instantly turned into pincers, collapsing into pools of blood only to be trampled into meat paste by the swarm behind them. I let my fingers slip. My unique talent, the sure hit boost, kicked in. My white-feathered arrow traced an unremarkable path through the chaotic battlefield. It zipped straight into the left ear canal of a spined forest leopard that was frantically clawing its way up the wall. The beast let out a shrill, agonizing scream. Its head jerked back, and its massive body tumbled from the 50-foot wall. I heard its neck snap as it hit the ground. Kill confirmed. Tier 1 low-level beast, spined forest leopard. Blood chi slightly increased. I watched the tiny, stingy numbers tick up on my panel. I wasn't disappointed. I had expected this. My body's natural aptitude was mediocre at best. Even with a god-tier system, I couldn't become a powerhouse overnight. Moving from a regular mortal to the skin tempering stage was just breaking through a thin sheet of paper. But moving from skin tempering to muscle tempering required refining every single fiber of my being. It was a massive accumulation of blood chi. 1 point per kill meant I had a long road ahead of me. I gritted my teeth. If I couldn't get quality, I'd make up for it with quantity. I didn't stop. I reached back, pulled a second arrow, and drew. Draw. Release. Draw. Release. In the middle of this earth-shaking cacophony, I became a cold, tireless machine. I intentionally slowed my movements, making my arms look like they were trembling. I gulped for air, putting on a show of being at my absolute limit. I needed everyone to think I was exhausted. In reality, thanks to my talent that prevented fatigue from drawing a bow, my muscles were completely relaxed. Every shot I fired was silently tempering the new skin I had just formed. Archery equals training. Skin toughness plus 0.01. Archery equals training. Skin toughness plus 0.01. The progress was like a turtle's crawl, but it was real. To avoid drawing eyes, I never targeted the healthy, ferocious beasts. I played the scavenger. I looked for the unlucky ones already mangled by the veterans' armor-piercing arrows. An armored rhino with a severed leg lay gasping in the snow. I sent an arrow through its bloodshot eye. A snow wolf with a shattered spine was howling in pain. My arrow slid silently through its jaw and into its brain. Nobody noticed the pathetic recruit tucked in the corner stealing kills. Everyone's attention was on a flashy figure nearby. Young master, magnificent, a few sycophants cheered. It was Zhang Qianfeng, the noble-born soldier. He stood in the most conspicuous spot on the battlements, wearing a luxurious snowfox fur coat. He held a crimson longbow that pulsed with a faint, magical glow. Every time he pulled it to full draw, his heavy, specialized arrows created a piercing sonic boom, pinning beasts to the frozen earth. It was a tiered rune bow. I glanced at him from the corner of my eye and saw right through the act. He wasn't a master archer. He was just relying on an expensive toy and a bottomless supply of high-grade pills. After barely 20 shots, his breathing turned ragged. His lackeys immediately handed him a precious blood chi recovery pill. These rich kids didn't even try to hide the fact that they were just here to pad their resumes. I looked away and went back to firing my unremarkable arrows. Time bled away. The battle reached a fever pitch. The mountain of beast corpses grew so high that the monsters in the rear began using their dead kin as a ramp. They leaped onto the battlements. Draw your blades. Hack the bastards down. Li Tai roared. He swung his heavy saber, splitting a bear soldier's skull open, though the impact tore the skin on his own palms. The wall turned into a slaughterhouse of hand-to-hand combat. Severed limbs and warm blood sprayed everywhere. I was swept into the melee, but I didn't draw my knife. For most archers, being closed in on was a death sentence. For me, it was a target-rich environment. I kept up my weak act, but my footwork was as slippery as an eel. I wove through the shadows of blades and claws. Whenever a comrade blocked a beast's path, my arrow would strike like a viper's tongue from an impossible angle. Swish! A point-blank blind shot. My white-feathered arrow grazed Li Tai's scalp and buried itself in the throat of a leopard lunging at his back. Li Tai didn't even see who fired it. He just let out a roar of, "Good job," and swung at the next monster. I didn't change my expression. I stepped over a corpse, plucked my arrow back out, wiped it on my sleeve, and knocked it again. Current realm, skin tempering, early stage. Progress, 12%. For hours passed. The high-intensity grind had drained the blood chi of veterans and recruits alike. Men collapsed, exhausted, letting the beasts tear into them. Even the flashy Zhang Qianfeng was being dragged back by his guards, his face pale and his arms limp from overexertion. I was the only one who kept that steady, rhythmic pace. My padded cotton coat was soaked black with gore. My face was a mask of mud and blood. I looked like a wreck, but beneath that filth, my flesh was becoming as tough as iron plate. I wasn't tired. In fact, I felt my strength surging. My 60-pound bow was starting to feel light. Suddenly, a sound like rolling thunder echoed from the depths of the snowy plains. It was a deep, bizarre roar that made the air vibrate. The effect was instant. Every beast attacking the wall froze as if by a spell. A look of primal terror flashed in their bloodshot eyes. They tucked their tails and retreated like a receding tide, clearing a wide path. The wind died down. The screaming stopped. Everyone stared, wide-eyed and blood-streaked, at the end of that path. A monster the size of a moving fortress emerged from the mist. It was covered in ice-blue bone armor, with a single, massive horn protruding from its head. A Tier 2 Beast King. Li Tai's voice cracked. His saber clattered to the stone floor. His eyes were full of absolute despair. I stood in the blood, squinting through the red haze. My bestiary updated. Tier 2 low-level, ice-armored bone rhino. Weakness, the white streak on the belly between the plates of bone armor. I reached into my quiver and touched the fletching of my next arrow. My quiver was empty, save for one last arrow. The fletching was stained with old blood. I didn't back down. I felt the veins on the back of my hand bulge, my blood surging through my veins so hard it felt like it might spill over. Deep in my eyes, a flicker of cold, calculated madness took hold. The wind stopped. Or rather, it was suppressed by the terrifying aura radiating from that massive beast. Every time the ice-armored bone rhino took a step, the thick ice beneath it groaned and shattered with a bone-chilling screech. It was enormous. Its body was encased in layers of deep blue bone armor that looked like forged steel. Each breath it exhaled hit the ground and instantly turned into pale white frost. The pressure from this Tier 2 Beast King was like an invisible mountain crushing the chest of every man on the Great Wall. Clatter! Someone dropped their bow. Captain Li Tai's legs were shaking uncontrollably. The skin-tempering stage he was so proud of was a joke in front of this thing. He swallowed hard, his face as white as a sheet. "It's over," he whispered, his voice trembling. "The army's main formation isn't ready. How are we supposed to fight a Tier 2 Beast King?" To a normal human, that beast was equivalent to a peak bone-tempering master, or even a half-step into the organ-tempering stage. Ordinary blades wouldn't even leave a white scratch on its hide. Retreat. Everyone get back behind the wall. A roar like spring thunder exploded from the high watchtower. A massive silhouette dropped from the sky like a giant bird. Boom. The figure slammed into the blood-stained battlements, the impact shattering the heavy green bricks under his feet. The man stood 8 feet tall. He wore no armor, only a thin red martial arts robe. In his hand, he trailed a massive decapitator sword as tall as a man. As he moved, his bones popped and cracked like frying beans. His exposed skin had a hard, bluish-black tint to it. "It's Commander Xin Yuan," a veteran screamed hysterically. "A bone-tempering master is stepping in." Xin Yuan gave the rhino a cold, murderous look. He gripped his sword with both hands. His inner chi erupted from his body, forming a faint white mist around him. Beast, you dare attack my swabbing outpost? Die. There was no more talk. Shen Yuan lunged, his legs packing so much power that the bricks beneath him turned to dust. He was a human cannonball. He leapt from the 40-foot wall, swinging that heavy blade downward with a piercing howl of wind, aiming straight for the rhino's single horn. The bone rhino roared at the sky. It didn't dodge. It lowered its head and met the strike with its ice-blue horn. Clang! A deafening explosion of metal on metal rang out across the plains. A visible shockwave rippled out, blasting snow, blood, and carcasses away for meters. On the wall, several recruits nearby clutched their ears as blood leaked from their eardrums. This was a fight between high-level warriors. At this level, low-rank soldiers didn't even have the right to watch. Where was I? The moment Shen Yuan jumped, I had slid backward. I tucked myself behind the carcass of an armored bear with a shattered head. I reached out, grabbed a handful of warm beast blood, and smeared it across my face. I lay there, perfectly still, my eyes cold and focused on the battlefield below. Shen Yuan's power was terrifying. I knew that even with my skin-tempering breakthrough, one hit from that sword would split me in half. The system was strong, but I couldn't get cocky. Without absolute strength, I was still an ant. I held my breath and slowed my heart rate. It was a trick I learned back in my youth as a fisherman on the East Sea. To catch a clever grouper, I used to lie behind rocks for half a day without blinking. Now, I was a fisherman again. But I wasn't holding a net. I was holding a 60-pound blackwood bow. And my prey wasn't a fish, it was a Tier 2 beast king. Asterisk bang, bang, bang. Below the wall, Shen Yuan and the rhino were locked in a brutal struggle. Sparks and ice shards flew every time the decapitator hit the blue armor. But Shen Yuan was only at the bone-tempering stage. He didn't have a decisive advantage. The rhino's raw strength and freezing breath were slowly pushing him back. Thud! Shen Yuan couldn't dodge in time. The rhino's thick tail slammed into his chest. He flew backward, carving a deep trench in the snow, and coughed up a huge spray of blood. The rhino saw its prey was hurt. Its eyes glowed with murderous intent. It charged like a heavy tank, ready to trample Shen Yuan into the dirt. Now, my pupils constricted. I remembered the bestiary entry perfectly. Weakness, the white streak on the belly between the bone plates. Usually, the rhino kept its belly low to the ground. But to stomp Shen Yuan, it reared up its front legs. For a split second, a 2-finger-wide strip of soft white flesh was exposed. I slid my hand out from under the bare carcass. I notched the arrow. I pulled the string to full draw. My movements were tiny, like a venomous snake peeking out from the snow. In the middle of the howling wind and the chaos of battle, no one noticed a blood-covered corpse in the corner of the wall. I felt my talents kick in. No fatigue draw. Arm strength boost. Arrow speed boost. I put all my hope into that last, blood-stained wooden arrow. Twang. The sound of the string was swallowed by the storm. The arrow didn't make a loud sonic boom. It moved like a ghost through the swirling snow and turbulent air. The wind and the shockwaves from Shen Yuan's fight nearly knocked it off course. But when it was 3 meters away, the arm strength rule took over. The arrow twisted unnaturally in midair, forcing itself back onto the correct trajectory. Shen Yuan looked up in despair as the rhino's massive hoof came down toward his head. He closed his eyes, waiting for the end. It was a dull, wet sound, like a hot iron rod being shoved into butter. The rhino's massive body froze. Its eyes, once full of rage, were suddenly filled with a very human sense of disbelief and agony. That pathetic wooden arrow, with its rusty tip, had buried itself perfectly into the white streak on its belly. The momentum from the speed boost was so high that the entire shaft disappeared inside, piercing the beast's heart. The massive ice-armored bone rhino collapsed. It hit the snow with the weight of a falling mountain, stopping less than half a foot from Shen Yuan's head. Snow dust exploded into the air as the massive beast hit the ground. It convulsed violently. Hot, thick blood mixed with chunks of internal organs sprayed from its mouth, staining the white snow a gruesome crimson. After a few desperate twitches, the monster went completely still. The silence that followed was deafening. Every soldier on the wall, and even Shen Yuan, standing right there in the snow, froze in shock. Shin Yuan stared blankly at the mountain of flesh inches away from him. His mind was a total void. He looked down at his heavy saber, wondering if that last strike had somehow triggered a hidden power. Did he really shatter a rank 2 monster's heart with a single vibration? Meanwhile, hidden under a pile of frozen corpses in the corner of the wall, I was gritting my teeth so hard they nearly cracked. My muscles were trembling uncontrollably. It wasn't fear. It was energy. A violent, scorching torrent of power was surging through an invisible line of fate, flooding into my limbs and bones. I had killed a rank 2 beast while being several levels lower. A fatal strike on an armored bone rhino. My system's core passive triggered. Hit equals blood chi growth. The essence I was absorbing was massive. For someone like me, who had only just reached the early stages of skin tempering, this rank 2 essence was like a potent, over-the-top medicine. It felt like my skin was being branded by liquid fire. The pale bronze hue of my flesh was rapidly shifting toward a deep, dark gold. Asterisk, damn it. I have to suppress this. Asterisk. I couldn't break through here. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Shun Yuan and the dead rhino. If I let my aura explode now, I'd become a target. The highborn brat Xian Feng and that mysterious Captain Shin Yuan would have me strapped to a table for dissection within the hour. I took a deep breath and bit the tip of my tongue. The sharp pain helped me force down the boiling blood chi. Then, with practiced ease, I rolled my eyes back, let my legs kick once, and slumped my head to the side. I played dead right next to a pile of frozen bodies. A few minutes later, once it was clear the rhino was dead and the lesser beasts had scattered without their leader, the wall erupted in cheers. Victory! Captain Shin Yuan is invincible. One strike to kill a rank 2 king. The soldiers waved their weapons frantically. Shin Yuan climbed out of the snow, his face turning a slight shade of red as he heard the praise. But when he walked over to the rhino and inspected the wound in its belly, his expression turned deadly serious. There was no saber mark deep inside. There was only a fragment of a broken, cheap wooden arrow. His eyes sharpened like a hawk's. He scanned the cheering soldiers on the wall. He saw Qian Feng holding his bow with a conflicted look. He saw Li Tai slumped over in exhaustion. He saw the cannon fodder, recruits either looting bodies or lying there like dead dogs. His gaze lingered on Qian Feng for a second before he shook his head. He had seen Qian Feng's weak, unstable aura earlier. A pampered flower from a greenhouse couldn't have fired a shot that vicious and well-hidden. Asterisk, an expert. There is a hidden master in my camp. Asterisk. Shin Yuan didn't say a word. He quietly tucked the bloody piece of wood into his sleeve. In a lawless place like the border, it was smarter not to provoke an eccentric master who clearly wanted to stay hidden. Back in the corpse pile, I let out a tiny, internal sigh of relief. I had hit the jackpot. The essence I absorbed was enough to keep me from being hungry for days and would likely push my skin tempering toward the small success stage. Most importantly, the arrow was destroyed inside the beast. There was no evidence. No one would ever link a world-shaking kill to a starving recruit like me. The perfect hunt. As the noise of the battlefield cleanup rose around me, I actually drifted off into a deep, genuine sleep. By the evening of the next day, the permanent stench of urine and blood in the camp was finally replaced by the smell of roasted meat and cheap liquor. We had won, and by army rules, that meant a feast. I sat in the shadows of the barracks, patiently wiping my black wooden bow with a rag. I used a specific knot I learned from fishermen back in my old life to tighten the fraying bowstring. Back then, if your ropes weren't tight during a storm, you died. That muscle memory was still etched into this body's bones. Once the bow was ready, I grabbed a handful of black mud mixed with coal soot. I smeared it all over my face, my neck, and the skin peeking through my tattered coat. I had to. The rank 2 essence was still working through me. My skin was no longer rough and dull. It had a faint, dark golden sheen that looked like tempered metal. It was a sign of a high-level breakthrough. If I walked out looking like a bronze statue, I'd be dead by morning. The soot was my camouflage. I coughed a few times, making myself look sickly and weak before stepping out. The training grounds were lit by massive bonfires. Huge slabs of monster meat sizzled over the flames, dripping fat into the fire. But the hierarchy of the border army was on full display. At the center, Captain Xin Yuan sat in a high-backed chair, surrounded by officers, and that peacock Qianfeng. They had the choice cuts of meat, white flour buns, and aged wine in porcelain bottles. As for us survivors, we were huddled at the edge of the grounds where the wind bit the hardest. Dozens of us crowded around a single iron pot filled with offal, bones, and scraps. Our wine was a jar of sour, watered-down village brew. "Don't you dare snatch, you bastards!" Li Tai roared. His shoulder was wrapped in bloody bandages, but his voice was as loud as ever. "Anyone who takes more than their share loses a hand." The surviving recruits stared at the pot with green eyes, looking like starving ghosts. Out of our original squad of 30, only 12 of us were left to eat. Even Wang Lizi, the man who spent every waking moment swaggering around and acting like a king, had vanished. No one cared about the dead. Everyone's eyes were glued to the pot. When my name, Zhang Wei, was called, Li Tai looked me up and down. He took a massive iron ladle and stirred the bottom of the pot with a heavy hand. To everyone's shock, he fished out a large piece of gristle with plenty of meat attached. He handed it to me along with a big bowl of oily broth. "Kid's got a tough life," Li Tai said, clapping me on the shoulder. "You survived a mess like yesterday's. From now on, follow me. As long as I've got a dry crust of bread, you won't starve." "Thank you, Captain," I said quickly. I hunched my shoulders and bowed low, making sure I looked both overwhelmed and physically frail. I carried my bowl to a dark, lonely corner and sat on a pile of straw. I pulled a small cloth pouch of coarse salt from my shirt and sprinkled a pinch into the soup. Then, I lowered my head and started gnawing on the gristle. Asterisk crunch. Crunch, asterisk. To anyone else, this bone would have been impossible to chew. But with my tempered teeth and newfound jaw strength, it was like eating a crispy snack. I ground the meat and bone into a paste and swallowed it all. The moment the food hit my stomach, the remaining rank 2 essence in my veins surged like a shark smelling blood. It devoured the tiny bit of energy from the meal and pumped it back into my limbs. Comfortable, I narrowed my eyes in satisfaction. On the outside, though, I kept up the act. I looked like a starving beggar who had never seen food before, even using my tongue to lick every last drop of grease from the bottom of the bowl. Suddenly, a commotion broke out in the center of the grounds. Qianfeng, that pampered young master, stood up with a cup of fine bamboo wine. He walked toward Commander Qin Yuan with a beaming smile. "Commander Qin, you slew a rank 2 demon king with a single strike yesterday. Your power is legendary," Qianfeng shouted so everyone could hear. "My family's merchant guild wishes to donate 100 blood-clotting pills and 50 steel blades to reward the brothers who fought to the death." The crowd erupted. "Young Master Qian is so generous," the officers shouted, their eyes shining. 100 blood-clotting pills were life-saving treasures in a place like this. Qin Yuan held his wine bowl, a faint, cold smirk touching his lips. "Young Master Qian is too kind. If you hadn't led your guards to hold the right flank, I wouldn't have had such an easy time." Everyone knew it was just polite talk, but Qianfeng tucked his chin out proudly. He waved a hand, and his servants began distributing the medicine. When it was Li Tai's turn, he received a bright red pill. He thanked them profusely, then turned back to us, his group of 12 shivering cannon fodder. "Young Master Qian was generous today, and I won't be greedy," Li Tai roared. "Everyone gets an extra half bowl of wine. My treat." The recruits cheered. Even if it was just watered-down rot gut, it was enough to warm the bones. I joined in, shouting, "Long live the captain," while my eyes remained cold and observant. I watched Qin Yuan. Even while he drank, his hawk-like eyes never stopped scanning the crowds of recruits. The old fox was still looking for the person who had fired those cold arrows yesterday. His gaze swept over me and lingered for barely half a second. All he saw was a scrawny recruit covered in soot and ash, trembling with excitement over half a bowl of sour wine. To him, I was just another piece of trash, greedily licking wine drops from the rim of a cracked bowl. Qin Yuan looked away and shook his head. It couldn't be me. A master who could time a perfect strike to pierce a demon king's vitals had to be a warrior with a heart of stone and the blood of a dragon. There was no way such a person would act like a peasant over a bowl of horse piss. Once I was sure he wasn't watching, I retreated further into the shadows. Acting is exhausting, I thought with a cold laugh. The pills and the blades meant nothing to me. The system panel inside my mind was the only currency that mattered in this world. I closed my eyes and checked my status. Host, Zhongwei. Realm, skin tempering, initial stage. Strength, 8.5 physique, 7.8 vision, 7.5 agility, 7.2. I was so close to the next level. I could feel the terrifying power coiled inside me. Right now, I didn't even need a weapon. I could kill a man like Wang Lizi with a single punch. If I washed the mud off, my skin was now so tough that a standard blade would likely only leave a white mark. But it wasn't enough. The celebration continued. Drunken soldiers were everywhere, some crying for their mothers, others bragging about kills they didn't make. I stood up, slung my blackwood bow tightly across my back, and slipped out of the noisy training grounds like a ghost. The next morning, the harsh blast of the horn dragged us back to reality. The camp smelled of vomit and sour wine. The veterans were leaning against walls, retching into the snow where their bile froze instantly. I rubbed my eyes and climbed out of the communal bunk,